Welcome back. September 12th marked 3 months since the tragic crash of Air India flight AI171 in Ahmedabad, which claimed 260 lives. Investigation is underway, but the preliminary report by the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau blamed the movement of the fuel control switches from run to cutoff as the reason for the crash. However, the preliminary report does not disclose whether they moved inadvertently or manually. While the interim compensation of 25 lakh rupees has been paid to many families, questions remain about accountability, safety lapses, and the promised 1 crore rupees to each deceased by the Tata Group that has yet to be released. While the final report is still awaited, a separate legal battle is unfolding overseas where US-based law firm Beasley Allen is representing families in potential claims against Boeing. Joining us now is Mike Andrews, senior aviation attorney with Beasley Allen. Mike, thank you very much for joining us. Let me begin by asking you, how many families have joined you so far in pursuing legal action outside India after the AI171 crash?
Currently, we represent the families of approximately 110 victims, and that's a mix of people who were on the aircraft as well as those who were on the ground.
Mike, what kind of compensation these families have received so far? Could you tell us what these families are telling you?
So far, many of the families are receiving the compensation, the interim payment from Air India. But so far, few, if any of those, have received any money under the Tata Fund. We understand that that fund was registered last month, and they anticipate beginning to make payments sometime, hopefully this month. But so far, those payments have not been forthcoming.
All right. Mike, you've also been meeting several families in Ahmedabad. You were here last month, and Ahmedabad and elsewhere also in Gujarat. What kind of difficulties are they sharing with you right now, both financially as well as emotionally?
Well, obviously, because the families and the victims cut across all socioeconomic groups, both on the plane and on the ground, they are met with a host of varying problems and difficulties. For example, in many cases, the primary breadwinner was lost in the household, which creates enormous financial difficulty. And as an example, I can tell you that in one case, at least, an elderly woman, a mother, who was depending on her adult son to help provide for her medical care. When he was killed on the crash, obviously that source of income stopped for her. And so she is very concerned and is bedridden, concerned about how her future medical care will be taken care of. You also have children who have lost the ability to have their education, health, and housing paid for over the loss of the primary breadwinner in the household. So you have financial and economic difficulties on top of the pain, suffering, grief, and loss that these families have gone through.
Right. Mike, we understand your team has filed a FOIA request in the US for the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder. Where does that process stand? And if you don't get the data, what's the next step for you then?
Right. So the FOIA, or the FOIA request, is a Freedom of Information Act request that's available, something that we do routinely in the United States. Regulatory agencies and the government have prescribed time periods to respond to those. Typically, it's about 20 days that they have to get a response. Now, I will tell you that we did receive an acknowledgement that the FOIA request had been received, but as of yet, we've received no actual substantive data in response to that. So to fully answer your question, what can we do if they fail or refuse to respond? There are procedures that we can go to try to enforce the FOIA. In some cases, the regulatory agencies can continue to delay and use, I hate to say excuses, but as rationale for not producing information, say things like the investigation is ongoing and we can't produce anything at this time. But in the event that we are completely stonewalled and no information is produced, when and if lawsuits are filed, we can then hope to avail ourselves of the court system to enforce production.
All right. What is your assessment of the preliminary crash report released by India's AAIB? Did it answer questions or did it leave more doubts to your mind?
Yeah, the preliminary report actually created and caused more questions than it provided answers. As you know, the preliminary report included information that was highly decontextualized, taken out of context, um, included snippets of information about the fuel switches, for example, and sort of a very choppy, not really continuous timeline of events that happened during the crash. As a result, people were left to speculate whether or not pilots may have intentionally caused the crash by turning the switches off. We don't think that narrative is correct, first of all. And we think it's unfair and premature to jump out and blame the pilots when certainly very little is known regarding the data on board this crash. We know that looking at video evidence and some of the information that we've been able to obtain, it appears that the ram air turbine, the RAT device, deployed very early, probably prior to these issues with the fuel switches. Now, that is an indicator to us that there are other issues on board the plane that have to be examined, which leads us to our knowledge and review of documents from both the FAA and Boeing regarding other potential issues on the 787.
Right. Mike Beasley Allen is also carrying out its own investigation. So how far along are you and what exactly are you looking into?
That's correct, and we are making progress there. We're working with a number of sources and experts to gather as much information as we can. One of the things that we are aware of is that several years ago, the FAA and Boeing began to issue a series of airworthiness directives and bulletins, and certainly Boeing documents, lengthy, extensive Boeing documents that indicate that there are leaks in certain water couplings on board the 787. The leaks are in areas which can affect the EE bays, and those are electronic equipment bays in the front and rear, or at least the aft section of the 787. As an example, I can show you one of the documents if you can see this very well. But what it indicates is that in the front, this is a Boeing document that was available online, you have an EE bay front and aft, which essentially will be in these areas of the aircraft underneath the cockpit, and then right in a line, according to the documents at least, behind the trailing edge of the wings. And so what the documents speak to is couplings and water lines that can leak in those areas. The documents are pretty extensive and go on to show specific areas on board the aircraft in which those couplings are located, and then even further how to access the couplings and how to replace them and what to replace them with. Now, we have been able to obtain what we think are exemplars of some of these couplings. The way we understand these are intended to work is that when two lines come together, this is a clamshell coupling that fits around the lines and simply clips together around those lines. One of the things we're looking at is whether it can appear to be latched and not actually latched, which in this case it is. As you can tell, it stays closed, but it's not actually completely latched. It just sort of holds itself together. You're supposed to pinch it further to cause it to completely latch, but then it can also become unlatched again. As we understand it, there is a shroud, a protective covering over the water lines and these couplings that when that shroud or covering is installed can somehow interfere with or perhaps cause these latches to become unlatched and open up. When that happens, according to the documents, it looks as if water leaks can occur in areas over wiring bundles and into electronic equipment bays, causing some of the computer equipment to become wet. That creates other issues because we are aware that there are autonomous or largely autonomous systems on board the aircraft that can cause unintended or uncommanded inputs to flight
Okay.
controls.
Very important point there, Mike. But since neither Boeing nor the FAA has issued any fresh warnings on the Dreamliner planes after this crash, if the black box doesn't give you enough to build a case, what next then for you?
Our plans will be to continue to work with our experts to develop whatever theories may be applicable to what happened here, because again, we anticipate the flight data recorder is going to contain a much more complete digital record of the power, of the settings, of the various warnings that the pilots may have had inside the cockpit at the time. And certainly the primary focus will be the timeline of the deployment of the RAT device and what initiated that deployment, because that to us is crucial to understanding what is happening here in the electrical system.
All right, Mike. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll continue to track both the official probe in India and your firm's legal efforts abroad. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining CNBC TV18 and sharing details with what is happening about the lawsuit that you're preparing against Boeing. With that, it is a wrap on this edition of Business 360. More news and updates continue right here on CNBC TV18.